for our new type of proof, we're not going to try to prove that two triangles are congruent to each other. Instead, we're going to try to prove that two parts of the triangles are congruent to each other. However, before we can do that, we're still going to need to prove that two triangles are congruent to each other. So this question about which postulate or theorem we're going to use, that's one of our 5 shortcuts. And so think of these as being 2-step problems. Step 1 is the same thing we've been doing in all the our previous videos in this unit, proving that two triangles are congruent, okay? So let's take a look at the diagram and see if we can get that done, if we can prove our two triangles are congruent to each other. This is not a given, by the way. I can't add that tick mark. That's what I'm trying to get to. So looking at the diagram that I have, I can see that I have a right angle. I may be tempted to use HL, but that's not necessarily the case. The only tick mark that I can add to this is because of the reflexive property, I can add that AC is congruent to AC. And so if I take a look at my diagram, then I do have two sides that are congruent and one angle that's congruent. However, it's not HL because I don't have the hypotenuse. In fact, that's what I'm trying to prove. And so step 1 is done. I can prove the two triangles are congruent to each other. So let me make that statement, triangle ABC. Remember, try to do that first one alphabetical if you can. The second one may or may not be alphabetical, it's just got to match up. So ABC would match up to CDA, so definitely not alphabetical. And the reason why I know that's true is not because of HL, but because of side, angle, side. I have two sides matched up and the angle in between them. It happens to be a right angle, but so be it. And so that's the old stuff, that's what we've already done. Now for our new part, this is where we get to step 2. And step 2 is to prove that parts of the triangle are congruent to each other, okay? So prove parts congruent. Well, once we know the two triangles are congruent to each other, what we had talked about at the very beginning of this chapter is that all their parts are equal. So all their angles, all their sides are going to be congruent. And so once we finish step 1, which is what we already know, all we have is one extra thing to do, and that's to prove that these two parts they ask us about, any two parts really, are congruent to each other. And the reason those two parts are congruent is going to be because of something we call CPCTC, which stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent to each other. In other words, once we prove that two triangles are congruent, all their parts are going to be congruent as well. And so that's going to be kind of our thinking for our new kinds of proofs. Prove that triangles are congruent the same way we've already done, and then add one extra step where we prove those parts are congruent to each other using CPCTC.